Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to install laminate flooring. Alright, so installing laminate flooring is very simple. It's a floating floor, which means there's no adhesives, no staples, no nails, none of that. The pieces click and lock together, and afterward you install trim around the perimeter of the room, and you're done. And that being said though, it's also very easy to mess up. So make sure you follow these steps and make sure it's done right. Alright, so a couple things before we start. Number one, make sure you clean your floor. So the last thing you want is like a little chunk of something that you install the flooring over top of, and later when you're done, you're walking on your floor and you can feel it kind of teeter back and forth. There's no way to get that out unless you take all the flooring up, remove it, and reinstall it. So big pain, so make sure everything is perfectly clean. Alright, number two, make sure you check your floor for any extreme dips. So no floor is perfect, so I'm not talking about the little gradual ones, that's not gonna really matter. It's the extreme low spots that you may have in your floor. So what happens is when you install your flooring over top of a really low dip, and that's right where a seam lands, as soon as someone steps on that, there's nothing to support underneath and it's gonna snap. So your flooring's not gonna last very long, so make sure you check all those spots. So if you're installing flooring over top of concrete, you can use self-leveling concrete just to kind of fill that little void. If it's over a wood floor, if it's not too crazy, I like using like an underlayment, like a thick vapor barrier, just to pad out that little section. So make sure your floor is completely flat and completely supported underneath the seams. Number three, laminate flooring expands and contracts. So make sure you bring it into the room that it's being installed in at least 2 to 3 days before you actually start cutting and installing it. So if you buy it from a really cold warehouse where it's being stored, you bring it into a really warm room and just start cutting and installing it, it will mess with the actual installation. So make sure you take care of that. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about are vapor barriers and underlayments. So when to use them, when not to use them. You always need to use them if it's a high moisture area, such as a basement. So today I'm going to be using a 2-in-1 underlayment. It provides moisture protection as well as cushioning. So you don't need to install this if you're installing the flooring on the second floor of your house directly onto the plywood subfloor. I still like to use it. It adds a little more cushion to it and it just has a better feel when you're walking on it. That's my opinion. I am going to be using this stuff today because I'm going directly over concrete. I do want to mention the flooring that I'm installing today actually has a built-in vapor barrier on the actual flooring itself. I'm still going to be using the underlayment for the cushioning aspect because the cushion actually takes out the minor imperfections that you may have in the floor, just the small ones, not those dips that I was talking about before, but it does disguise a lot of those and it just has a better feel when you're actually walking on the floor. So now I'm going to show you actually how to install that. All right, so we're about to start rolling out our first row of underlayment. Very simple process. All you want to do is take the roll it all the way down to the end of the room, cut it. When you bring the roll back to start your second row, I want you to peel off the film. There's a little sticky backing on one end of the underlayment. When you overlap your second row to your first row of underlayment, that sticky backing is gonna stick to the first row and actually adhere to it. It's not the best, but it's better than nothing. So any spots that are kicking up on you, you can tape down and just keep moving forward. So everything is nice and flat when you actually go to start installing the flooring. All right, so we're getting ready to start laying our first row. The one thing you guys have to figure out now is which direction you want to run your flooring. So typically you want to run the longest length of the room. For example, in this case, I have 12 feet by 10 feet. So I'm actually going to run the flooring this way and work my way down. So another thing to note, when you start installing the floor, you want the groove to always face you. So here's a little scrap so you can see it a little easier. This is the groove right here, and this is the tongue. So what you want to do, lay the flooring down like this. When the groove faces you, that next row, the tongue fits into the groove, and then you snap it down and lock it into place. All right, so the first piece you want to cut is right here. You want to cut this tongue off right here so you have a nice square edge. So when that goes against the wall, you're good to go as long as you keep the correct spacing. So let's talk about spacing really quick. If you're installing this floor in the summer, chances are your flooring has reached the maximum length and it can't really expand anymore. So your gap can be 1/4 inch, 3/8, somewhere around there. If it's the winter time, most likely it's, you know, as small as it can get. So your gap can be a little bit bigger, 3/8 to 1/2 inch. Look at the directions, see what your specific flooring calls for. In my case, it's right there, right in the middle at 3/8. So, and we are at room temperature here. So my spacing is actually gonna be 3/8, but do what works for you, and depends on what time of year you're actually installing the floor. So let's cut this first piece. So I'm gonna be cutting all my flooring today with a chop saw, but if you don't have a chop saw, you can use a circular saw, jigsaw, any one of those is fine. Chop saw is the quickest, but if you're doing this one project and you don't wanna buy this, and you have a circular saw available, you could just use that, perfectly fine. As long as your cuts are straight, you're good to go. All right, so we have our first board cut. One thing I do want to mention is for the first few rows, I'm actually going to keep this tight to the drywall here. Once the rows become stable enough, so everything's running pretty straight and we're in a good groove, I'm going to pull these back a little bit and give myself some spacing here. It's just a little easier to keep it tight to the wall at first while you're, you know, pushing everything and everything's kind of becoming a little more stable. 3 or 4 rows in, it's going to be stable enough to where you can actually pull this away, get your spacing, and be good to go in terms of installing the rest of the flooring. Always keep in mind though, I still want you guys to do the spacing here. That's very, very important. So if this flooring is tight to the wall here and you get down and you make that one tight, the floors will buckle when it expands. So make sure that you always have the spacing right over here on the sides. Because if you don't, when you start cutting those other rows, it's going to mess up the actual sizing of the flooring, and it's not going to turn out that great. All right, so the next board you want to install, you want to take the tongue and slip it into the groove. You want to go about a 20-degree angle or so. Make sure this is flush and keep it tight, and it falls right into place right here. All right, so we've reached the other side of the room, so the next piece that we're gonna install is actually a cut. So now I'm gonna show you how to measure that for your spacing. All right, so I'm gonna go all the way to the wall, and to this point right here, we have 50 and 3/8. So I did mention that I was gonna do a 3/8 gap. So what we wanna do is cut our piece to 50 inches. All right, so when you go to stick your tape on the piece to measure, don't hook the tongue. That's not where we measured from. So the tongue is actually going to be buried. So we measured from the flooring itself. So you want to hook right on here on this little edge. And our measurement is 50 inches. I'm going to make a little mark right at 50. All right, so we're about to start our second row. A couple things I want to mention really quick. When you cut the last piece in your first row, the scrap usually you can bring over and start your next row with, as long as it fits into these rules. The piece can't be any less than 8 inches, and the seams can't be any less than 12 inches apart. So normally you're able to do that technique. I can't do that here because my cutoff was only a couple inches. So that's not the worst thing in the world. So that kind of puts the ball in our court. So by following those specific rules there, I'm going to cut my piece 34 inches. Right here, it could be whatever you want as long as it follows those rules. 34-inch piece puts my seam 16 inches away from the first row, so that is perfectly fine. My biggest thing is when you're cutting the seams and staggering them, I want you to be very conscious of being sporadic with them. So if you can see an actual pattern in the seams that you're cutting, the floor, it'll be fine, but just aesthetically, if people can pick up, you know, those seams in the floor, it's not the best look. So try to be as sporadic as possible. All right, so we have our next piece cut to size. I cut it to 34 inches. One thing that's extremely important that I want you guys to always pay attention to is the direction and the way the floor is being laid. So we laid our first row, we know that the groove is facing us. So when we lay our second row, we want the tongue to slip into the groove. So you always start from the left and move your way to the right. So with that being said, when you cut this piece, you need to cut the left side off, just like this. So the next piece can actually connect into this side here. If you cut the wrong side, this piece cannot be used in this spot, so always be aware of that. Also too, always check for any chips or imperfections in the pieces. So if you just start laying the floor and you're not looking at everything and you get to the middle and there's a chip in one and you don't see it and you keep moving along, at the end of the project, if you go back and look and see that chip in the middle, there's no way to get that out without taking out all the floor. So make sure you're very conscious over that. So when you install each and every row, you want to lay this piece down here just like this, and you want to stick the tongue into the groove. And what I want you to do is make sure your spacing is good on the side here, and I want you to just push that in. You'll feel a little click, and that'll go down just like that. Make sure your seam is always very tight. It's very easy for you to just start rolling and, you know, this one's not tight and then your next row is, you know, another 16th gap. You don't want that. You want everything to be super tight. And once you get 3 or 4 rows in and you do that double check and everything's, you know, super tight, then you're good to go. And then you can kind of run with it. Then you have a nice stable floor to actually start working with. So, but the second and third, you know, row is really difficult to work with. You have stuff sliding around, so just be very conscious over that. All right, depending on what type of flooring you're actually installing, there's a couple different ways that they actually connect with each other. The first way is, just like you saw in the last piece, the tongue slips into the groove. You want to slide it over until it hits that last piece right next to it. You want to push that whole piece down, and then you want to tap where the two seams meet with a rubber mallet, and that will actually lock them into place. The style that I actually have, which I'm going to show you in a second how to actually install it, is same concept. You take this piece, take the tongue, slide it into the groove. You want to slide it all the way over until the tongue of this new piece hits the existing piece here. You want to push the whole piece down so it locks on the long edge. And then what you're gonna do, you're gonna take a little block, place it on the end, take your rubber mallet and tap the block over. So the piece that you're currently installing slides into the piece that you just did, and that's what locks the tongue into the groove. So I'm gonna show you what that looks like now. All right, so you wanna take this piece, put the tongue into the groove, do your little angle here. I want you to slide it all the way over until the tongue hits right here. Then I want you to push this flooring down, lock this into place, just like that. Now you see this gap right here? We're gonna close that right now. So I'm gonna take my block and a rubber mallet, tap the other side, and keep in mind I have a spacer all the way at the end of this row, so the whole flooring can't slide back and forth. So we're gonna take the block and smack this in to lock it into place. All right, so see how tight that seam is? That's exactly what you want. It's tight everywhere right here. And now we are ready to do our next piece. So here's the little block right here that I just did. You put it right on here and you tap going this way, and make sure that you have a spacer down at the other end so the whole flooring doesn't shift all the way down. It'll stop at the spacer and then you're good. So I'm gonna show you how to do this last cut piece. All right, so we have our piece cut. Same concept that you just saw in the last piece. You wanna stick this in, slide it all the way until it hits that tongue. and you want to push this in just like that. Perfectly tight here. Now we just got to close that gap. Now, this is the block that we just used to smack this other piece in. Obviously, it's not going to work here. So what we're going to do is grab a pull bar. So this is just a bar with a little angle on it with a little flare at the end that you can actually stick this in. And what you want to do is tap right into here. And that pull bar will tighten up that seam right here. So everything is super tight on this edge and this edge here, and you're all set with this. So that's the concept. In the middle of the field, you are going to use this block to tap the seams in. Just be really careful of this finished edge. It's really easy to slip and actually chip your piece. But the block is meant for the field, and right when you hit the ends, you're gonna use the pull bar. All right, so we're 5 rows in. This is a really good time to stop and kind of show you what mine looks like. So we're at a point now that I have enough rows in where everything's locked in really tight. I want you to check your seams. I want you to check here. I want you to check your joints right over into here. Everything should be super tight. Everything looks good right here. I mentioned before, I had this whole thing pushed up against the wall. It's just a little easier to work on here. Now that we have, we have our stable flooring section right here, I actually want to pull this away from the wall a little bit. You can actually use your pull bar here and right over here, get it in that little groove and just kick it out a little bit. And I want you to get one of your spacers in here, push it right in here. You can pull this out a little bit more, as much as you need. Right over here, that's pretty good. Now I just want you to kind of put a couple down the line. So we have one here. You might have to pack them out a little bit, depending if the wall's in or out, whatever you gotta do. Perfect here. You keep moving down the line. Right here, grab our pull bar. Now, another thing too, so I'm gonna pull this out equal for right now, right? So we have this. I'm gonna put this right here. Maybe I'll do one more right here. Space that. Perfect. All right, so. Another thing I want you to do too, I want you to check the distance from wall here and the wall right to here. It doesn't have to be perfectly dead on, but I want you to try to get it as close as possible. Now is the time. You're not very far into this. You can actually shift this whole section still. So I did somewhat of an even spacing here away from the wall. If one needs to be a little closer than the other, just to get it a little bit closer so you end relatively with a somewhat straight piece at the end, now's the time to adjust it to do so. If everything looks good, you can just keep rolling on your other cuts and keep following that same process. I'll show you a couple close-ups of how they actually connect together. I know it's kind of tough to see from the camera, like with that wide angle, so I'm gonna get some close-ups and hopefully won't be too bad for you guys, all right? All right, we made it to the end. We're at that last part where we're gonna have to start ripping the flooring that's up against the wall. So let me show you what to do next. All right, so I may have a little bit of a different situation than you guys. You might be at the end of your run and it's just one straight rip going across. I actually have a doorway, so I'll show you how to tackle that. So what we have here is we have a rip that goes down here, and then you have a doorway right here. There's gonna be a bullnose on the ends, and then which drops down into the other floor. And then we're just gonna finish our rip right there. So next thing that we have to do is get our measurement. So remember, same rules still apply. You still have to be a 1/4 inch or 3/8 away from the wall. So our numbers are going to be, what do we got here? We have 3 5/8. And then over here we have 3 3/4, it looks like. So we are probably gonna do, let's do 3 3/8, so that's a good medium. Yeah, that'll give us 3/8 gap on the one side and a 1/4 inch on the other. One thing I just wanna note too, if I start with a full right here, the full's gonna end somewhere in this area here, which allows me to put another full right here, which would travel over to this side. So I usually don't like any seams here. It's not a big deal if you do have one. But I'd rather just have one solid piece. It's just a little easier. And then you can connect another solid piece here, which runs right into the bullnose trim, which I'll show you in a second. Now, in terms of cutting this piece, I'm actually gonna use a table saw. You can use a circular saw, jigsaw, anything you want. So, table saw is the fastest, but you know, use whatever you have. All right, so when you go mark this piece to cut it, what I wanna remind you is, I don't want you to hook the tongue right here. I want you to hook the finished edge here, and that's where our 3/8 comes into play. So yeah, make sure that's really important. So if you're using a table saw and you're ripping this to 3 3/8, don't set the table saw to 3 3/8 because this tongue is gonna ride against the fence too, and it's gonna add 1/8 of an inch. So if you are using a table saw, I want you to set the table saw to 3 1/2. By setting it 3 1/2, it'll make this part will be ripped 3 1/2 here, and then when this gets buried, your actual piece turns into 3 3/8. So just a reminder. Same principle here. I'm gonna get this locked in. Put your spacer at the end. Go right here. Now you're gonna take your pull bar. Just give it a couple taps. We have our nice spacing here, and this thing is very tight. We're good to go here. Now we're ready for the next piece. All right, so here's the next piece right here. So I figured I would cut it and show you exactly what I did because it's a little difficult to explain, but pretty much I used the piece that we just installed as a base. So what you wanna do is go off of here, still keeping with your same spacing technique that I showed you. Same thing here, you go off from here to here. And then I want you to butt your tape to here and run all the way down and get this measurement here, and then measure this. And then after you mark it, I actually cut this out with a jigsaw. So I cut all those measurements here, and then same principle goes in terms of installation. So we're gonna fit this in, knock it back in, and tighten up this joint right here. And then we just have one piece left right here before we add this little piece and then the bullnose. All right, so we have this piece in here. I ripped this piece and I installed that the same exact way that I showed you guys how to do this piece here. And let me show you what else I did here. So, I don't know if you guys have any risers on your project. Most likely it's just one room, but if you do, I actually installed this riser right here. And then what we're gonna do, we're gonna install our last piece here. So he's gonna go in just like this. And all I did to measure this one, I just measured from this point over to the riser, this point here, and then when the bullnose goes on, make sure there's a little gap, just like I left it a little shy over here on both sides. So we're good to go there. Now something that's specific to my job, I actually have to install these door jambs right here in order for me to show you guys how to do the bullnose. So let me do that really quick. All right, so we got our door jambs in up all the way. And the reason why I had to do the flooring first and the door jambs after the flooring, I didn't want to do a gap right here. So I left the gap between the flooring and the framing that was here, and then I could do the jambs right on top of this so everything looks tight here. Now it's time to measure this piece right here. This is the bullnose. I actually already have this cut. This size is gonna be exact because it's a different material. This is actually a PVC material and it matches the color of the floor. So I'm gonna cut the exact size here and then we're gonna glue it in. All right, so this is the type of adhesive that I'm gonna be using to glue the bullnose down. You cannot nail the bullnose. It's not meant for that. It's really thin PVC and it's just gonna snap on you. So it's meant to be glued down and then you can use painter's tape to actually keep it down until it dries. So I use Loctite Power Grab. It's a really good glue. Don't go cheap on the construction adhesive on this. So it gets a lot of traffic. People are gonna be stepping on this and there's no nails. So make sure you use a good one. I also wanna mention too, when you're actually installing the adhesive on here, I want you to stay at least 3/8 back. So the last thing you wanna do is get it too close to the edge. So when you actually push this piece down, you don't want it to spill out. So make sure you stay far enough back in here, load it up here, and I like to do this little lip too. Same principle goes here. So make sure you kind of stay away from this edge so you don't have any glue spilling out. All right, so we're ready to put our piece on. We're all glued. So what I want to do is start at one end. You don't want to slide it on because you don't want to push the glue around. You want to go right above and then you push down here. Let's see here, good. Looks good there. Perfect. All right, nice and tight. Don't have any glue spilling out any on the edges, so we're good there. Make sure we're in here good. All right, now, what you wanna do now is grab a roll of painter's tape and tape this down. There we go, nice and tight. Perfect. Go anywhere. I also want to mention that I used a damp paper towel before I glued everything. I just wiped everything down so everything was dust free. And that would allow the glue to adhere. We are good to go. All right guys, well that's the end of the video. Let me give you a tour real quick so you can see how everything turned out. So I didn't cover shoe molding and base molding around the perimeter. If you don't have any base, just like I do, you are gonna have to add it. If you do have base, then you just have to add shoe molding. It didn't make much sense for me to do that right now. I got a lot of other projects in here. I'm doing a bookcase and a desk and stuff, so I will do another video on how to trim out a room. But yeah, if you have any questions whatsoever, just leave them in the comments and I will get back to you. And I really appreciate you guys watching. All right, thanks.